Pull up a stool and let me pour you a drink. And let's talk a little noir at the bar.
Thanks for joining us today for another episode of Noir at the Bar, where you get to hear some of your favorite authors reading from their books and short stories. Now, this season, our guest readers are authors that are going to be attending the Left Coast Crime in Seattle, April 11th to 14th. So not only do you get to hear them on the show here, you can go visit them, meet them, and maybe get a book signed.
Well, we're having some delicious cocktails down here, and we've been joined by James D. of Hannah. And if I'm correct, James, you'll be reading your short story, This Will Take Up Serpents.
That is what I'm reading. I'm a contrarian among the group today. This is a short story I wrote a couple of years ago. Just a quick hit in and out, so to speak. All them bodies crowded under the tent mixed with July humidity. It's a heady brew, the air thick with sweat and the hope of salvation. Not that anyone notices, because Brother Josiah has been speaking in tongues for the past 5 minutes, and this enraptures the crowd. They are hearing words intended only for God, the Bible states. They eat this up, Josiah told you once, but you got to start slow, though. On a week-long revival, you can't blow your whole wad that first night. Give them a little at first to get them talking to the neighbors. By the last night, there's a full house, and you're talking gibberish, and they'll think you're a prophet. He took a long slug from a pint of Kentucky Gentleman. That's where the big money comes in. Tonight's packed, just as he promised. Folks jammed in tight, spilling out across the county fairgrounds where you set up. Brother Josiah's traveling show of faith. You joined last summer after you got out of Green River. The firebug you bunked with telling you about his cousin, the road preacher always looking for help. Hiring ex-cons is what they call good optics, Josiah said. Shows we're committed to helping save souls. The truth? Ex-cons understand what's happening here. They're not about to let a little faith get in the way of a good thing. The plate passed around once already, came back heavy. Cash, checks, a mix of jewelry, some junk, some pieces that'll fence out nicely. It makes you think about the faith it takes to pull rings off your finger to give it to a stranger because you believe that's what the Lord commands. To be fair, Brother Josiah is charismatic as hell, young and movie star handsome, and you've got to have a bunch of suckers beyond just the hardcore old-school believers. Those bastards will die someday, and to keep this working, there have to be fresh faces in the crowd. That's how you end up with these little fundamentalist girls out there. Their long hair and denim skirts to the ankles, and innocence in their eyes. Makes you remember how you used to believe, right up until the moment you didn't. You start thinking about the blonde girl in Alabama last month. The one Brother Josiah said had a blessing from the Lord, who he called a Jubilee spirit. Josiah's hand on their shoulders, they knelt and prayed, and everyone called to the Holy Spirit for his will to be done. You watched it from Josiah's camper, smoking a cigarette and wanting the night to be done. The service ended and the crowd dispersed, and the next time you saw that girl, she was coming out of the camper, her hair a tangled mess, her face wet with tears. Josiah in the doorway, no shirt on, said they'd been studying scriptures and to make sure she got home safe. Tonight, Brother Josiah raises his Bible into the air, and the Gospel of Mark does say they shall take up serpents into their hands, and it will not hurt them at all. That's your cue. It's the Friday night grand finale, what everyone's coming to see. You bring the boxes to the front of the tent. Josiah offers thanks and a wink no one else sees. He's been using the same old cotton mouths for years. Got 'em from another preacher, pulling the same grift. Aged and defanged, and you keep 'em hungry and lethargic. They're harmless as milk snakes, Josiah says. All just for the show. He reaches into the box, brings out the first snake, and lifts it above his head. It writhes and hisses wildly, more activity than Josiah's ever seen. And there's a second of surprise in his eyes just before the snake sinks fangs into his flesh. You know how you'd let those old snakes go, watching them slither off to freedom before you found two fresh cottonmouths, ones that were young and full of themselves. You think about the way that young girl cried as you drove her home, the tears you cried once you stopped believing. And as the frenzy of the congregation swells, the serpent strikes Josiah again. Hallelujah.
Yeah, I was following along online as you were reading, just to be a cheater. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'll ask you the question. I have so many questions on this because I'm looking at short stories myself. What do you want people to get out of this short story using the symbolism that you used?
That's a really great question. I really think we need to question everything. I come from, I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, Southern West Virginia, grew up a lot in fundamentalist religions, and I know the power that that can have, and you see it even today, and the way that religion plays a role in politics today. And I really think the best thing you can do is question whether or not it should have that role, and the role that it has in the control of other people's lives.
Well, I mean, you can see visualize that, and you can hear the words, and there's some depth there, and greatly appreciate the small amount of space. So thank you very much.
Thank you much.
Mr. Joe Clifford, and he's going to be reading from Say My Name. Now, this is a true crime novel, so it's a true crime that never really happened, or did it? Tell us.
Yeah, that's the premise. I was going to do that introduction, but thanks for saving me the time. Interpret that term loosely. I'm going to do something a little out of the box here and read the author's note, but I think you'll see why when I read it. When the Rogers twins, Annabelle and Ava, were reported missing the summer of 1985, we expected they'd be found. Of course they would. Kids didn't go missing from Berlin, Connecticut. Berlin, like the one in Germany, pronounced with the accent between syllables, like pearl and preposition. And God forbid local residents hear you pronounce it the other way. Ours was a nice little New England town, ensconced from the horrors, such as kidnapping and murder. That was the stuff of books and movies. Annabelle and Ava must have forgotten to tell their parents about plans. They had to be at a friend's house, went for lunch, lost track of time. The girls would return home soon, safe and sound. It would all be one big misunderstanding, except the girls never came home. Police were called in, search parties sent out, eyewitness testimony taken. There were several suspects, but no arrests made. Now, nearly 4 years later, their bodies still haven't been recovered. I'd like to say nothing changed after that summer, that our quaint, charming New England town remained an idyllic village where young families moved to escape the scourge of the big city. I'd like to say that my best friends at the time, Jim Case, Ron Lamontagne, and especially Jack Lacko, weren't forever affected. Life courses permanently altered. I wish I could tell you that the girls going missing in no way played a part in my moving west or in my staying gone as long as I did. Just I'd like to tell you that my return has brought solace and peace, a reconciliation with the past. From a certain point of view, maybe I could sell that narrative. I write fiction, after all. It's not like I've sat around a dark room for decades, slowly drinking myself into oblivion, consumed by the unknown fates of a couple girls I knew for a few years when I was 12. And yet there's been an element of that summer in everything I've done since. My interactions with people in the industry, my interpersonal relationships with friends and lovers. Pushing 50, I've made many bad decisions, most of which I can't blame on that hometown tragedy. But their abduction certainly played a part in my decision to write crime novels. With over a dozen books published, I've enjoyed success as a mystery author. I've hit several bestseller lists, and books have been optioned and translated into foreign languages. I was able to tour Italy a couple winters back. That was fun. Writing has earned me a big house on the hill, critical acclaim, money. Life for me has gone on. Still, despite these reassurances, the horror of that summer continues to haunt, and its lingering specter has become a permanent part of who I am. I may have left that town, but that town never left me. So much of our fears is rooted in the other. This is particularly true in small insular towns where everyone looks the same, acts the same, believes the same. I still remember the story my mother, God rest her soul, shared when I was a young boy about that poor woman from a tiny town not unlike ours who was visiting New York City. There in a subway bathroom, a gang of thugs confronted her, demanding her wedding ring. When the woman refused to surrender, the gang cut it off, finger and all. It wasn't until much later I realized that, like that uncle or family friend who lost his arm by dangling out the car window, the story wasn't true. It was make-believe, a cautionary tale designed to scare us into behaving, living in fear. This is how I viewed the big city growing up. It's a dangerous, godless place filled with dangerous, godless people. It's why we stayed hidden in the suburbs, concealed by the lush green valleys of summer long after winter days turned them cold and barren. I've spent most of my life in the big city, and sure, it's hard to be a saint there, but its evils and transgressions pale in comparison to the sinister elements that can lurk in a small town where everyone knows everyone's secret, so somehow no one sees a goddamn thing. It's not 1985 anymore. Annabelle and Ava Rogers' bodies most certainly will never be recovered. Like my mother, like my friend Jack Lacko, those young girls are dead. My mother and Jack died of cancer. My mother was 53, Jack my age, late 40s. Still their passing was natural. It's sad and premature, but natural. What happened to the twins was not. Their story is an abomination, an anomaly, an apparition, a thing that should not be but is. Growing up, I never would have believed it possible. Even as a crime writer who mines the darkest depths of the human psyche, I never could conjure something as ghastly as the truth I uncovered writing this book. I'd feel better if the product were the result of my twisted imagination, except it is true, all of it. What I discovered writing this book, I wish I could unlearn. I long to go back to that original spin, that fear of the others instilled by my mother. Go back to believing that monsters hide in closets and live under beds, but they don't. They reside in our hometowns, hiding in plain sight. They shop at the same stores, eat at the same restaurants. We pass them every day. We don't recognize them because they look just like us. Thank you. That's the author's note in introduction to Say My Name.
I can relate to the dealing with true crime and an event that happens around you and it stays with you. How do you deal with that when you write the book? Throughout it, what's your experience?
Well, I mean, just remember, I'm a fiction writer who lies, so take all of that into account as you're reading this book. And when you get to the end, I think you'll see how I get away with calling it a true crime novel. It's sort of outside of the genre, really. You follow where the muse takes you, and this one took me to a weird place, and all the people in the book are real, and you'll have to wait to see how it ends up.
Wow, fantastic.
You notice it's getting crowded down here, and it's crowded with all good people, including Rob Osler, who is going to read from his book, Cirque to Slay, which I believe is the book 2 of the Hated and Friends mystery series, which will be coming out in early May. Am I correct?
That's right. Off to the circus.
Yes.
So I'll be reading from chapter 1, Then Came the Fire. And since it's chapter 1, I'll just start at the beginning.
Great. Looking forward to this.
A single spotlight flashed on, revealing a woman in white tux and pink top hat standing in the center of the ring. With the fading of the symbol's crest, she asked for a volunteer from the audience. I glanced around the massive tent's interior to see who would be brave enough to join Mysterium's famed magician, Kennedy Osaka, on stage. The next instant, I was blinded by light. Despite us sitting in the rafters in the last row, a spotlight, as if magnetically drawn to big personalities, managed to find my best friend's raised hand. "Wonderful," the magician announced, lifting a tapered white sleeve toward Hollister. "Please come down, madam, and join me in Mysterium's ring." Like a kid rushing downstairs on Christmas morning, Hollister nearly tripped as she raced down the aisle while an assistant wheeled a large cabinet onto the otherwise empty stage. After a bit of repartee and fanfare, Hollister was ushered into the cabinet, her mohawk brushing against its ceiling. With a grand flourish, the magician slid the door shut. Intensive music throbbed as she spun the large box around in a circle. The rotation completed, she paused dramatically before throwing open the door. Oohs and ahs from the 300 people in attendance filled the tent. Hollister had vanished. I knew it was a trick, but still it freaked me out. Another volunteer was recruited to the stage to examine the cabinet inside and out. Seemingly satisfied there was no Serena Williams-sized woman hiding inside, he hurried back to his front row seat to the audience's applause. The magician closed the door again and wheeled the box in another 360. The music crescendoed. Tiny blonde hairs on the back of my neck and arms shivered in anticipation. I leaned forward in my seat. Kennedy Osaka dramatically paused again. I swallowed hard. The entire tent went silent. She flung open the door. The audience's collective held breath gave way to an eruption of applause and cheers of delight. My bestie had suddenly reappeared, now wearing an outfit identical to the magician's. Never mind that on Hollister, the white spandex made her resemble one of those inflatable snowmen people set in their front yards at the holidays. Hoot, hoot, I howled. Not only was the trick next level abracadabraing, but I had never, ever seen Hollister wearing anything other than black. She was escorted backstage and within minutes hustled back to our seats in her own clothes. The quick change and steep ascent had her breathing hard. "That was a blast, Hayden," she said. "I can't believe you didn't go for it." "Then again, I suppose you volunteering was long odds, huh?" "Yes, somewhere between you and Heels and me anywhere near basketball." After a brief musical interlude to settle the crowd, the ring mistress, a tall, slender woman in a sultry black gown, introduced the next act. Against the low rumble of a timpani, she touted the group's acrobatic awards collected from competitions around the globe. each accolade heightening the anticipation for the spectacle to come. Again the lights dimmed. To a chaotic sweep of spotlights across the stage, she announced, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Mysterium's Tent of Splendors, from Romania and celebrated the world over, Adrenaline." According to the program notes, an Estonian rock band, appropriately named Estonia, replaced the orchestra on the raised stage. They served up a screeching metal riff as the 4 members of Adrenaline entered the stage from the 4 different entrances used by the audience. The guys cartwheeled down the aisles, performed handstands on the arms of chairs, and somersaulted into the ring. Wearing the costumes I had seen in the program, studded black harnesses and essentially tight black boxer briefs, they took turns performing increasingly complex twisting flips as they raced across the stage. Next came a routine with chairs, which culminated in one guy doing a handstand on a wooden chair held by another who stood on another guy's shoulders, who perched on the shoulders of the 4th guy. Then came the fire. 5 flaming hoops descended from the catwalk high in the tent's pitch and hovered above the stage at heights of about 3 to 6 feet. One by one, each guy sprinted across the stage, jumping feet first or leaping head-on or flipping in a tight spinning ball through each hoop. Up in the ante, one horizontal hoop was positioned about 20 feet from a trampoline. The guys took turns bouncing to unnerving heights, and through the ring of fire as they performed complicated aerial stunts. It was like watching Olympic platform diving, just live and upside down and with fire instead of water. The mini-show concluded with Adrenaline receiving a standing ovation. The evening then entered its final phase, a cake and champagne reception with an opportunity for us VIP guests to have pictures taken with cast members. Hollister and I had only scored tickets thanks to a friend of a friend, despite qualifying only as P's in that acronym. For its sold-out month-long run, Mysterium had set up its extravagant tent just south of Seattle's downtown. The mashup of cabaret, magic, and aerial arts, with a Michelin dinner thrown in, had been taking America by storm. Hollister gave me a shove. "Those Adrenaline boys are here for a whole month. Go get a picture with them. While you're at it, get a phone number." I replied with a groan. Hollister knew I would never do any such thing. Hanging around her, I'd lost some of my natural shyness, but never would I match her boldness. More comfortable watching from the sidelines, I occasionally gave in and followed her, feet dragging and cursing under my breath onto the field. And yet I'd be lying if I didn't admit that Hollister's friendship hadn't been good for me. Because of her, I'd at least partially broken out of my shell and discovered courage I didn't know I had. But there were limits, and one was hitting on a Romanian Adonis in short shorts.
Excellent, Rob. Very visual, very descriptive. I could see what you were writing. I greatly appreciate it as a reader-listener. I'm sure that was important to you as you were writing it, especially when I think about you going to your 2nd book in the series. How was it going, writing it from the 1st book and going to the 2nd book?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, at least for me, well, it's only the first time I've done it, so I think it's going to be the most challenging from the 1st to the 2nd. Because you have to, tell enough of the story, kind of recap enough of the story of the 1st book to give readers grounding in who the characters are, and at the same time acknowledging that a lot of people, or at least hopefully a lot of people, read book 1, and you don't want to bore them with, kind of rehashing a story that that they've already read. So I think that's the trickiest thing, is moving from 1 to 2, is making 2 fresh in its own work. At the same time, putting in enough reminders of story 1 where people who start at book 2, it still works as a standalone.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on that. I think the way you wrote this first chapter, me listening to it, I want to say, I need to go get the 1st book. I'm not going to start on book 2. So I'm sure other people will, coming out March 5th, I believe.
That's right.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.